Hi, I'm Esther, and in this video I'm going to talk you through from start to finish how to sew up the Megan Nielsen Veronika skirt. This is a free PDF pattern on the Megan Nielsen website. As long as you sign up to the newsletter, you can access this pattern completely free of charge. There are two size ranges available for the Veronika skirt, so select the one that is appropriate for you. And there are three variations that you can choose from. There's view A, which has a thicker waistband and a side zip, and the optional scalloped pockets that go on the front. View B is also for woven fabrics but with a slightly narrower waistband, whereas view C is for stretch fabrics with an elastic waistband, so you don't need to insert a zip with view C.
I'll be sewing up view A and view C in this video, so let's get started. First up, I'll be sewing view A with the pockets. These are my pieces cut out in this beautiful rust 100% linen. I have two pairs of pockets here with their right sides together, and I'm going to sew 6mm from the edge on these two sides only. If you're using a standard sewing foot, 6mm should be the width of half your foot, so you can use that as a guide. And as you can see, my fabric started slipping, so I decided to pop a few pins in to stop it from moving out of place. Once sewn, you can use some shears to clip into the curve. This will help when it comes time to turn the pocket the right way out. Clip as close as you can to the line of stitching without actually cutting the stitching. If you happen to have pinking shears, you can use these to cut away some of the excess seam allowance, and that will have the same effect. Now we can turn the pocket bags the right way out. It might take a little bit of fiddling around to get the edges nice and flat. I do find that finger pressing along the edge really helps before I take it to the iron, just to make sure that all of the fabric is turned out really nicely. And they should look like this when they're all turned out, and I'm going to give them a really nice press with the iron to get them super flat and ready to sew. While I'm at the iron, I'm going to fuse my interfacing to my waistband pieces. I just found this interfacing somewhere, so ideally I would have used maybe a white interfacing, but it's not going to be shown, so I think it will be okay. Now I'm going to top stitch 6mm around my pocket openings. Then I can pin them in place onto my skirt front, and I'm going to stitch 6mm all around the scalloped edge. Do the other pocket as well, and when it's all sewn up, it will look something like this. I will note that if you're after a more subtle attachment of the pocket, you can sew closer to the edge. So instead of 6mm, you can do an edge stitch of 1mm, or you could also make it a feature and do 2 rows of top stitching. Once the pockets are on, we're going to sew the back piece to the front piece, but only on the right-hand side seam. This is because the left side is going to have a zip. Use a couple of pins to secure it in place, and then we're just going to sew straight down. The seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters. Then I'm also going to use a serger to overlock the edges or serge the edges. If you don't have a serger or overlocker, you can use a zigzag stitch. This is to make sure that it doesn't get all frayed and come undone. Then we'll press that side seam towards the back of the skirt. Now we're going to sew a scant 1.5 centimeters from the raw edge of the waistline of the skirt. It just means we're going to sew 1.5 centimeters from that edge so that later we can clip into it. Once it's sewn, you can use your scissors or your clippers to clip all the way up to that stitching line at regular intervals. Just be very careful not to clip the line of stitching. Once it's clipped, it will be much easier to spread out straight like this, and we can attach it to the waistband. First, mark the midpoint of your waistband, either with a pin or an erasable marker, and then line up that midpoint with the side seam of the skirt. Pin that in place and then ease the rest of the skirt so that it fits in line with the waistband. Once it's pinned, you can sew them together. So 1.5 centimeters from that edge. I find it helpful to have the waistband on the bottom and the skirt part on the top so that it's easier to ease as you go. Now we can press the seam allowance up towards the waistband. It pains me to say that I couldn't find a matching invisible zipper to my terracotta linen fabric, so I had to go with what I already had. Honestly, I went to the shops and they only had, bright orange, bright red, and they stood out pretty much just as much as this off-white one did, or this cream-colored one did. So I decided instead of buying another one, I would just use one that I had. It turned out to be fine in the end, but do take note that if you're wanting the invisible zipper to be invisible, then maybe select a fabric that you can easily match an invisible zipper to, or plan ahead enough so that you can order one online so that it will come in time for you to sew your project. Now, when you're ready to attach your zipper, make sure that the right sides are together and that the teeth of the zipper are now aligned 1.5 centimeters from the edge of your side seam. Pin it in place and then sew as close as you can to the coil all the way down until the foot hits the end of the zipper. I find it easiest to sew one line of stitching first that holds the zipper in place, and then I do a second line of stitching using either one of these specialty feet so I can get as close to the coil as possible, or an invisible zipper foot. So if you have one of them, use that and you should be able to get nice and close to the teeth without sewing over them. And then we can sew up the remainder of the side seam. Make sure to be aware of the end of your invisible zipper. I like to move it out of the way so that I can pretty much sew all the way up to just past the zipper. It should be looking like this, and we can attach the waistband facing. Fold one long edge of the waistband down 1.5 centimeters and press it. Pop the facing on top of the waistband with the folded edge along the bottom so that we can now sew along the side seam edge and the top edge of the waistband. Once sewn, you can clip the corners off to reduce the bulk in the corners, and then once you turn it out the right way, there should be no raw edges showing at all. To secure the waistband facing on the inside, I've chosen to do a ditch stitch, which means I'm going to sew along this bottom edge of the waistband so that you can't really see the stitches at all. I've used lots of pins to make sure that the facing is lined up on the inside, since I won't be able to see that while I'm sewing. This is what it looked like on the outside of the skirt, and this is what it looked like on the inside. As an alternative, you can choose to hand sew the inside of your facing, so then you won't be able to see it on the outside at all. The Veronika skirt is cut on the bias in certain parts, so that means the hem's going to drop a little unevenly over time. So we recommend hanging it for 1 or 2 days to allow the hem to drop naturally before we finish it off. After a few days, I could clearly see that there were some areas of the skirt that had dropped quite low, so to fix this, I lay the skirt down flat on the table, took a measuring tape and measured from the waist down to the hem, and I repeated that measurement at several points around the skirt, comparing that measurement. So for example, at one point in the skirt it was 59 centimeters, at another it was 61. So in that area where it was 61, I needed to trim off about 2 centimeters. Once I've corrected my hemline, I can sew a line of basting stitches 6 mil all around the edge of my hem, and I'm going to use that line of stitching to fold up my hem and press it, and then fold it a second time and press it again. This will make it a lot easier to sew the hem. It's on a curve, so if you don't do this and you skip this step, you're going to have a really rough time hemming the skirt. Give the hem a really good press and it should be beautifully finished like this. You can also press the rest of the skirt because the skirt is now complete. To sew up view B, you can follow the exact same set of instructions for view A, except that your waistband will end up narrower. And next I'm going to sew up view C, which is the stretch version. I've cut the front, back and waistband as per the instructions, and I've got my front laying face up on the table, and I'm going to put my back piece down on top of that so that the right sides are together, and I'm going to sew all the way down both side seams. I'll also sew my waistband by folding it in half and sewing down that short edge. Note that because we're working with a stretch fabric, you will need to use a stretch stitch, so I'm using my serger here, otherwise known as an overlocker. Otherwise, if you don't have one, you can use the zigzag stitch on a regular sewing machine. Now I've pressed my waistband seam down flat, and then I've folded the waistband in half, and I'm going to press that all the way around. While I'm here, I'm also going to press the side seams of the skirt. Next, I'll mark the midpoint of the waistband and align that with one of the side seams. Then I'll align the other seam of the waistband with the other side seam. The rest of the waistband should line up with the rest of the waist of the skirt, and you can pin all around because we're going to serge that all together. You should have 3 layers of fabric in total, 2 layers from the waistband and then 1 layer from the skirt. Make sure that the right side of the skirt piece is the side that's touching the waistband. Remember to leave a 5 centimeter gap in this waistband, otherwise we can't get our elastic in. So I've used pins to mark that so that I know where to start and stop, and now that I've got that little gap, I'm going to get my elastic and attach a safety pin to one end. That's going to help me guide the elastic through the waistband. Feed it all the way through until you're out the other end, and then overlap your elastic by 1 inch and sew it together. Now I'm going to make sure that the elastic's sitting nicely within the waistband so that we can close up the little gap that we left. Once the gap is closed, the skirt is pretty much done. It's up to you if you would like to top stitch down the middle of the waistband. That could prevent the elastic from twisting. And then it's also up to you if you would like to hem your skirt. Since I've used a jersey here, it's not going to fray, but maybe take note of whatever fabric choice that you have and make sure that it doesn't come unraveled at the hem.
So there we go, my skirts are all finished. I hope that this video was helpful for you. If you got stuck on anything, feel free to comment below and we will do our best to help you get unstuck. There are a few other patterns that are available for free from the Megan Nielsen website, so you can access them in the same way if you'd like to get sewing on your next project. I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!